Today, I want to go over the draft from Game 1 of Gen.G versus BLG from the MSI Finals this morning. I think this was the game with the biggest draft gap, and I want to explain to you guys why Gen.G won this draft so hard. So if we go ahead and start out with the bans, Gen.G banned Taliyah, Ahri, and Vayne. So Taliyah and Ahri are just two strong mids right now, and if you don't plan on wanting either of them, it's better to take one off the table. Personally, I think Taliyah is super overrated. Ahri's pretty good, but I think Taliyah is really overpicked because champions like Azir, Aurelion Sol, Hui, and a couple others are really, really, really good and just straight up better than that champion. Taliyah's not bad, but there are much better options, so I don't think that ban is super worth doing. I'm actually just going to pause here so I have time to talk. So the Ahri ban is okay as well, but it's kind of the same case as Taliyah, where the champion's fine, but there are just better options, so you might as well ban those better options for mid lane anyways. Either way, it's Knight's champion pool, and he doesn't really play the A-Souls, the Huis, the Azirs, so these bans are fair enough, sure. The Vayne ban as well is basically saying that you want to pick a tank melee top lane and just getting rid of that as an abusive counter pick. This also says that you don't want to lane swap. Since you're banning a bad top lane matchup, you're assuming that the lanes are just going to be standard, and since you're going to be blind picking a tank top lane most likely into a non-lane swap, you're just going to want to get rid of that most volatile counter, which is usually the Vayne into tanks. On the other side, BLG banned A-Soul, Corki, and Nautilus. A-Soul ban is obviously good. Chovy has played it a bunch, proven. Same thing with the Corki. Chovy's obviously insane on that champ, and they're two of the strongest mids in the game so far. So the mid bans from BLG are much better than the mid bans of Gen.G because Corki and A-Soul are just better champions than Taliyah and Ahri overall. They scale better, they have longer range, they're much safer. Maybe not Ahri, but you get the point. Lastly, the Nautilus ban from BLG is really, really bad. Why? Because the champ is literally just a death bot. Go back and watch any game from MSI where Nautilus is picked, and you'll see anytime they hook in, they just die. Most of the time, they go 0-6 at least in a game, and it's really just embarrassing how useless this champion is. Why it's the most popular pairing with Senna and one of the most popular supports period these days, I have zero clue. Also, there's no reason to ban it because if they first pick Nautilus, you get Senna, and then you can just pick Braum, and Nautilus can't play the game. So the Nautilus ban makes absolutely no sense, and honestly, it was probably doing Gen.G a favor because Gen.G would have picked Nautilus over TK, which would have been terrible. Either way, the bans overall were pretty eh. The biggest one for me is the Vayne ban, though, considering I don't know why teams have been blinding top tanks on B3. It doesn't really make sense to me. There's not really a need to. But either way, if you're planning on blinding top as a tank, which you usually end up doing on blue side anyways, the Vayne ban is pretty good. Also, the Corki and A-Soul bans are really, really solid from BLG, which leaves really the only really high prio mids left up as Azir and Hui, and then maybe an Orianna in a second tier there. So Gen.G go ahead and first pick the Senna, which is really, really good, obviously. It creates infinite flexibility in the draft. That's really one of the reasons why Senna is so good. Not only does she scale infinitely with infinite range, infinite crit with her souls, and just do a ridiculous amount of damage in the late game with just absurd range. The reason she's so good, especially in draft, is because you can do so many different things with her. Most teams, if not all of them, do fasting Senna these days with something like a Nautilus or a TK with her, which assumes that the Nautilus or the TK is going to be farming, while Senna is going to be able to stack souls much faster without farming. Theoretically, you could just have Senna farm as an AD carry and pick something like a Soraka with her or a Karma to have some kind of really long range sustain lane pressure where you kind of just out sustain enemy bot lane with range. We don't really see pro teams do that, but it's definitely a viable option. But over on the fasting side, I'm definitely not a fan of Nautilus at all. So again, glad that BLG banned that away. But the TK is okay. Basically, you're just saying, okay, what does Senna need to win this game? She infinitely scales and she has infinitely long range. What does she need? And that's pretty much always, the answer is always going to be protection. So TK provides that. Even though the champ outside of his ult is pretty useless in my opinion, his ult obviously provides protection. And it doesn't always have to be for Senna. If she positions properly, she's not really going to be in range of any of the champions that BLG has picked so far. So either way, the TK is fine. I usually prefer an actual tank, like a more dedicated tank, like an Ornn, like a Malphite, like a Cho'Gath, something like that, that can be a little more flexible in terms of play style and dynamic than a Tahm Kench, because Tahm Kench is super linear. You know he's just going to sit next to the ADC and eat them when they're in trouble. Other than that, the champ doesn't have a whole lot to offer. Whereas a champion like Ornn, if paired with Senna, is the best scaling tank in the game. Ornn items are absurdly OP, has a ton of CC, obviously the tank assassin, whatever meme. Champ is just broken. So I prefer something like that as a Senna pairing. Either way, the Senna TK is perfectly fine, and it serves the purpose. After the Senna first pick, BLG answer with Lucian Nami. So this is already really hard losing. Why? Because you're already losing in scaling. So this means that BLG is going to play hard toward bot lane and try to snowball through that. The problem is with the way competitive play is, it's slow paced enough to where the early game team is always going to fall off eventually, even if they get ahead. So that means that the scaling elements of Gen.G's comp are always going to be a factor because the game is slow paced and will always reach that 25 to 30 minute mark where Senna is going to be fully online. That's why I don't like early game comps, especially Lucian Nami, that spike around 15 to 20 minutes, and it forces your team to have to play really aggressive and force fights around objectives that the other team doesn't even have to go to. Like BLG this game is going to have to force Herald fights because that's their strong point in the game, and Gen.G's like, okay, we'll just sit in side lanes and farm and pick up minion waves for 30 minutes and then we'll beat you, and there's nothing that BLG can really do about it. The Lucian Nami lane I just don't like. Nami sucks as a champion in general. Milio is way better as a pairing with Lucian anyways, as is Braum, as are several other champions in my opinion. Nami just doesn't really offer a whole lot. Her wave is good in certain circumstances against teams that have to hard run into you, but with a Senna, that's not really going to be the case. So Nami doesn't really offer a whole lot here. And, typically she doesn't offer a whole lot anyways, aside from pressing E on the Lucian. And the problem is this game, Senna being such long range, even if Lucian dashes forward, it's going to be really hard for him to hit the Senna. Especially with a Tahm Kench by her side, she's always going to be safe. And if she positions properly, she's always going to be out of range of the Lucian. So it's going to be really hard for Lucian to play the game just based off of the first pick from Gen.G. So there's a lot of reasons I don't like Lucian Nami, like ever. But I know it's popular. It would be a lot better if they paired Milio and just did the basic crit build with Kraken, Navori, Essence Reaver, things like that. But the way Lucian's played currently with First Strike and the Burst Energizer build, I've talked about it a million times. It's just completely useless, does no damage to tanks, and it just doesn't really have a way to function. Even if it gets really ahead, there's going to come a point in the game where it just doesn't really do much. So Gen.G then 2-3 Tahm Kench and K'Sante on blue side. Again, Tahm Kench we've talked about. It's pretty standard with Nautilus banned. Which was, Gen.G should be thankful that they didn't get a chance to pick Nautilus. That would have been disastrous. So the TK Senna is pretty basic. It's acceptable. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about that. The K'Sante blind, I wonder. I keep wondering why pro teams blind solo laners for no reason. It's more acceptable on blue side than it does on red, because on blue side you're going to have to end up blind picking a solo lane anyways, whether that be mid or top, because R5 exists as a solo lane counter. So you might as well get it out of the way now before top lane bans hit. The thing that I don't like here is that there are a lot less good junglers that there are good top laners. In top lane, if you want to blind pick a tank, which I don't recommend doing in general, but that's what pro teams do these days. You have K'Sante, you have Ornn, you have Malphite. There are plenty of champions like this that are completely viable, that fit the mold of the team comp you're trying to build. And so I would recommend picking jungle here instead of K'Sante. You can pick something like Xin Zhao, or if you want to stick with the same theme as Senna, you can do Ivern. yeah, really Ivern would be the best option here to stick with the same theme, really hard scaling, long range, enchanting, buffing up the Senna, and playing around that as a win condition. Again, blind picking top lane is understandable, especially on blue side, since you're going to have to do it eventually anyways. I would just prefer jungle because I think there are less junglers on the table than top laners. So I would want to pick jungle before the second round of bans hit rather. Either way, the K'Sante's fine. I think the champion is pretty overpicked. Obviously, it can be insane and it has a lot of potential as a champion. And we see even K'Sante do K'Sante things a billion times. I just think when you have Senna TK, if you pick Ornn here, the game is pretty much doomed with Lucian Nami on the other side. Lucian's never going to do any damage to the Ornn, and as soon as the game hits 30 minutes, even 25 minutes, Ornn's level 14, he starts giving out items, and the Lucian's going to be completely useless by that point. If you pick Ornn here, the game is auto-won. K'Sante is acceptable, but there definitely could be better options there. And then to counter the K'Sante, BLG pick Twisted Fate. With Vayne banned, that's probably the next best thing if you want to go with a ranged lane counter, quote unquote. If they really wanted to counter the K'Sante, they would have picked either Gwen, Fiora, or Garen. All three of those champions utterly destroy K'Sante in the lane and outscale him rather. The Twisted Fate is fine. Theoretically, it should be a flex between mid and top, but no one plays it AP mid these days, even though it's pretty good. So it's obviously going top lane as AD, and already you see that Lucian, Nami, TF, 3 range champs, no frontline, no damage really. The way that TF and Lucian are built in competitive play do not do damage, especially to tanks. Since TK is farming, he's going to be really tanky and have a lot of gold income to get tank items, and K'Sante is obviously going to be really tanky. So they're going to be unkillable. If you add in the fact that Senna's going to be way longer range than both Lucian and TF, she shouldn't ever be in range of either of them. So tell me how Lucian and TF are supposed to consistently deal damage this game. It just doesn't really, I don't really see that happening, and they're going to have a really, really hard time finding angles in the game. So if we fast forward a bit here, BLG are banning Nidalee, which Canyon has pulled out a couple times here and been really successful on. I guess it's understandable, but I don't really think blind picking Nidalee is a great idea. I mean, obviously BLG is probably going to pick jungle on R4, so it wouldn't be a blind pick anyways. It's really just a takeaway pick from Canyon because he's been successful on it. I still think the champion is really bad. Again, if Gen.G were smart here, they would just pick something like the Ivern and just be good with it, and then an AP, like a long range AP carry in the mid lane, and that would pretty much be your comp. And there's the Hui ban, like I said, really good ban there. So pretty much the only option left is Azir, if they want to just go with the standard AP carry in the mid lane. The Sejuani ban, I mean, I don't really like it because you picked Twisted Fate in the top lane and you're not going to pick a melee mid laner. So the synergy with Sejuani is never going to exist. If you wanted to ban a frontline or jungler, just ban Maokai because that's a better champion anyways. And there's the Maokai ban, like I said. So I'm assuming that BLG is just going to pick Zins out here. That's the best champion available. If they pick Lee Sin, I'm going to lose my mind. It should really just be a Zin pick here, and there's that. So pretty standard stuff. I mean, what BLG is doing is just picking the quote-unquote strongest meta champ available in every position, and it's super random. They don't have any real way to play the game here. All 4 champions have zero synergy together, and like zero aligning interests inside of the game. So let's fast forward here. No, we don't have to fast forward. And here comes the Karthus pick. So this is what I was talking about in my video earlier. I didn't actually take a look at this draft beforehand. I just knew that Karthus was picked. And so this is actually such a giga draft gap right now, just based off the scaling alone. So Karthus into Xin is also a favorable matchup because Karthus can just outpace him so ridiculously hard. Karthus can pretty much full clear by the time Xin has cleared 4 camps. So Karthus is going to be infinitely ahead of Xin this game, which means that Xin pretty much has to perma-gank and hope that it works out. He can't just play standard and farm. I'm going to pause again here and back up so we can see the pick order. So the Karthus pick means that Xin has to permagank. He can't afford to farm camps, and what that means is that he's not guaranteeing his value inside of the game. Usually as a jungler, when you're power farming, it's guaranteeing your value by making sure you have consistent gold income, you can get items, and you can have consistent value in team fights. What the Karthus pick does to Xin Zhao is make him have to permagank because he's never going to outscale or outpace the Karthus. The Karthus is automatically going to have value just because of the way the champ is structured and into the champions he's playing against. The Xin Zhao is the complete opposite. We've already determined that BLG is completely outranged and that their carries aren't going to be able to do damage in team fights. So Xin has to hard gank around bot lane and hard pressure that winning lane. And if he doesn't, and if they fall behind at all in the early game, the game is completely lost. So Xin Zhao, while it was the strongest blind pick jungler available, the Karthus pick just completely negates it. And along with the Yone pick, it's just really, really nice drafting from Gen.G. Karthus loves to be solo AP on a team. Blind pick Yone can be dangerous, but hey, it's pro play. No one's actually going to use R5 for an actual counter pick. So the Yone I really, really like. And it's honestly the best AD mid laner available, especially with the champions that we've picked. Synergizes well with the Tahm Kench if you need safety there. Literally the only thing that can make the Gen.G draft better is replacing K'Sante with Ornn. If that happens, it's an auto win, 100%. There's absolutely zero chance BLG win. Even still, the way the game is, it's not like Twisted Fate is going to be getting 4 solo kills on the K'Sante. So it's not like the K'Sante's game ruining by any means. It's completely fine, and it functions the way they want to inside of the team comp, which is literally just frontline and buying space for Senna and Karthus. So with Neeko coming in on R5, it confirms the win for Gen.G. There is zero synergy between BLG's champions. They have no clue what they're doing. They have no way to play the game, and they're going to be their champions just are on different pages. It doesn't matter if the players themselves are communicating well and on the same page. All of their champions want to do different things. I say that it could be worse, but compared to Gen.G's comp, who are all ranged, Senna and Karthus are long range. All of them scale insanely well. The Senna has protection. They all just scale so ridiculously well. And what that does is put so much pressure on BLG to perform early that the likelihood of them playing to utter perfection in the first 20 minutes of the game is near zero. So basically what BLG needs to win this game is hard win around bot lane. Probably they're going to want to stack a wave and then send TF and Xin down bot lane like 3 minutes, 4 minutes into the game, 4-man dive bot lane, and then just zone Senna and TK off a bunch of waves. But then what can happen is, if I don't know if a lane swap happened this game or not, but if BLG plays like that and does that correctly, it could lead to a snowball. But even if that is successful for them, the scaling of Gen.G is inevitable. Senna's always going to be more useful than Lucian. Always. It doesn't matter. She has basically double his range and safety with Tahm Kench, and she just does more damage because Lucian, with the way he's built, doesn't do damage to tanks. If someone buys Ninja Tabby, he just doesn't really do that much damage anymore. Same thing with Twisted Fate. Same thing with Xin Zhao. The team has no scaling. So even if they get ahead in the early game, it's going to be a struggle past 25 or 30 minutes. Even if at 20 minutes they're 5k gold up and 2 dragons, it's going to be a struggle come a certain point. Senna hits 3 items and a 100 soul threshold. Karthus hits 3 items. Yone hits 3 items. This is where Gen.G want to play around their item breakpoints, and if that happens correctly, then it's impossible for BLG to play the game. BLG kind of has a comp where they all want to dive in-ish, but it's just so hard to execute because Lucian wants to go in, get a quick burst, and walk out, wait for his cooldowns. TF is just kind of there. Xin, Neeko kind of want to dive in. Neeko needs a really good flank, but again, TK exists, and Karthus honestly wants to die, so it's not a big deal if he gets assassinated. All the while, Yone has complete freedom to do whatever he wants. If he gets a QSS, he doesn't have to worry about gold card, and he can just utterly ruin the backline. And in combination with a Cassante on the backline and a Karthus ultimate, there's not really a whole lot of counterplay, especially because Nami's not a champion that can easily build Locket. She's going to rush into the mandate first item and likely go into something like Redemption, or maybe Ardent Sensor or something like that. There's not going to be any Locket or any AoE shielding to counterplay the Karthus ult, so he's going to have a complete field day in this game. Overall, it was just a complete 1v9 draft gap for Gen.G. Utterly absurd. Probably one of the biggest draft kingdoms of the entire tournament, honestly. And it showed inside of the game, honestly. You could see the dynamics in which the teams wanted to fight, even though, yes, player execution always comes into it as the primary factor of what decides fights. But you could see just in the way the champions interact with each other in this game on opposite sides, Gen.G just has a much easier time playing the game with guaranteed value, guaranteed scaling, while it puts all the pressure on BLG to win early and convert that early lead into enough objectives to snowball and win the game from there. If the game reaches 25 minutes, Gen.G will win. And if BLG mess up once in the early game, Gen.G will win. It's really simple as that, and it showed inside of the game. I'll let the rest of this play out. And that's really all I have to say. That's a pretty deep dive into this draft. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.